When you think about the film Die Hard, the myth is pretty simple, isn't it? One cop, one building. It's become so foundational, so, baked into our culture that it feels less like a movie and more like a universal story.
That is precisely the subject before us. We're not here to give a moment-by-moment account of Christmas Eve at Nakatomi Plaza.
Right.
Based on the sources you've shared, our mission here is really to explore the why. Why did this specific film with a TV actor nobody wanted end up revolutionizing the entire action genre?
It's a huge question.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just a hit. It leveraged Hollywood failure, internal studio panic, and some really profound social commentary to redefine the action hero, the villain, and, the very blueprint for high-stakes thrillers for decades to come.
We are, of course, setting the scene here. It's Los Angeles, Christmas Eve. A New York police officer, John McClane, has flown across the country to try and reconcile with his estranged wife, Holly.
Holly Gennaro McClane.
Right. He walks into this high-tech corporate party, and suddenly he's dealing with heavily armed thieves posing as terrorists. But the real story, the analysis we're getting into, is buried in the contract negotiations, the marketing panic that almost sank the whole thing, and the surprising depth under all that shattered glass.
And we're going to analyze that creative journey, starting with the original source novel, and follow that thread all the way to the final script's themes. And this journey reveals some surprising commitments. Commitments to vulnerability, to themes of redemption, profound American anxiety, and a really scathing critique of 1980s bureaucracy that fueled its lasting cultural influence.
It's a remarkably complex machine hiding behind what seems like a simple action premise.
It really is.
So let's unpack this journey, starting right at the foundation, which is an incredibly complex and, frankly, somewhat embarrassing contractual obligation involving a true Hollywood legend.
It's a story of low expectations meeting a really high opportunity. Die Hard is based on Roderick Thorpe's 1979 novel Nothing Lasts Forever. And crucially, that book was itself a sequel to Thorpe's 1966 novel The Detective. And 20th Century Fox had already adapted The Detective into a 1968 film.
Starring Frank Sinatra.
Starring Frank Sinatra. And here is where Hollywood legal history creates a legend. Because the studio had adapted that first novel, they were contractually obligated, a binding clause, to offer the lead role in the sequel's film adaptation to Frank Sinatra.
Wow. So John McClane could have been Frank Sinatra.
Imagine that phone call. Sinatra was 70 years old at the time, and he naturally, declined the role. In the book, the character was actually named Joe Leland.
Ah.
But that little contractual detail is vital because it proves how completely unconcerned the studio was with finding some cutting-edge action star. They were just fulfilling an old obligation for a project they likely expected very little from.
They weren't seeking a genre revolution.
No, they were just checking a box.
And that initial sense of mediocrity is really reflected in the pitch that was given to studio executives even before the director John McTiernan was involved.
It was bluntly described as Rambo in an office building.
That says it all.
It tells you everything you need to know about the expected tone. A simple, muscle-bound, relentless killing machine. That's what they thought they were making.
So McTiernan's involvement was the first major turning point then?
A huge turning point. He had just worked with producers Lawrence Gordon and Joel Silver on Predator, so he understood that existing action template perfectly.
Sure.
However, he accepted the job on one strict condition, that the film had to incorporate some joy. He actively resisted that prevailing mean-spirited tone of other terrorist films of the era. He insisted it shouldn't just be a simplistic string of mean, nasty acts.
And that one mandate seems to have changed everything.
It allowed for the humor, the self-deprecation, and most importantly, the surprising emotional core of John McClane to emerge. It set it apart from its genre brethren almost immediately.
And speaking of that emotional core, let's get to the controversial casting of Bruce Willis. If the studio was obligated to offer it to Sinatra, their next moves showed they were still desperate to find a classic 1980s action hero.
Oh, they went through the entire Rolodex of every major star of the decade. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Richard Gere, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford.
Do they have all the big names?
All of them. The list of people who passed on the role is staggering. Schwarzenegger famously chose to star in the comedy Twins instead.
Right.
The prevailing action archetype of the era was that muscle-bound, stoic, invincible hero, and the studios tried desperately to fit John McClane into that established mold.
And they failed. They failed to secure a major action star, and that failure led them directly to Bruce Willis, who was at the time known primarily for a romantic comedy TV series, Moonlighting.
And his casting only happened because of a completely unrelated delay. There was an 11-week production stop on Moonlighting caused by his co-star Sybil Shepherd's pregnancy. That was the window they needed.
And here is where the industry panic really begins to set in. Willis was paid an unprecedented $5 million for the role.
A massive controversial sum at the time. It put him among Hollywood's highest-paid actors, right alongside established dramatic legends like Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford.
And he was a television actor.
It was a television actor crossing that line into feature films with a salary equivalent to the biggest box office draws in the world.
That salary was immediately seen by industry professionals as a terrible investment, a career-defining risk.
It was. There was a clear, unspoken, often rigid divide between successful film actors and television actors. And Willis was just crossing that line with a massive paycheck, having only starred in one other moderately successful film before.
The industry reaction was hostile, wasn't it?
Very hostile. We see critics like David Ansen of Newsweek infamously calling Willis the most unpopular actor ever to get $5 million for making a movie.
Oh.
The controversy really stemmed from this perceived lack of a built-in audience.
Right. Stallone or Schwarzenegger, you knew their fans would show up.
Exactly. They guaranteed action fans would be there on opening weekend. Willis did not guarantee that same box office success for an action movie.
So the studios panic over this risky investment, and the initial audience research, which showed, remarkably negative opinions of Willis as an action lead, it's completely evident in their marketing pivot.
That lack of confidence led 20th Century Fox to drastically change their strategy. The early marketing materials, instead of highlighting the star, focused entirely on the setting.
Nakatomi Plaza, the sleek, towering building itself.
Exactly. Willis's name was in tiny print, almost obscured, and his image was completely omitted from the first full-page newspaper ads.
So the building was the star.
The publicity team essentially decided that the building was the star. They were acknowledging the huge risk they took on their lead actor. It was a tactical retreat.
But the studio executives eventually had to justify that massive salary and unusual casting. They started defending Willis by arguing his everyman persona was absolutely essential to the film's success.
And that defense proved to be prophetic, didn't it? Willis's casting allowed the audience to believe, really for the first time in a major action film of that era, that the hero could actually fail.
That he could get hurt.
That he could get hurt, that he could die. This choice fundamentally contrasted with the invincible, muscle-bound heroes that dominated the market, and it paved the way for that relatable, grounded, vulnerable action star archetype that would define the next decade of cinema.
Now, if Willis defined this new vulnerable hero, Alan Rickman, making his screen debut, redefine the villain in a way that had an equally profound and lasting impact.
Absolutely. Rickman was already a celebrated stage actor in his early 40s, and he was performing as the villain in a Broadway play, Les Liaisons Dangereuses.
And that's where he was discovered.
That's where producer Joel Silver saw him. Silver was immediately convinced and cast him as Hans Gruber.
And Rickman's portrayal did much more than just create an iconic character. It fundamentally changed the action movie villain.
It did. The archetype shifted away from the bland, often physically menacing, or just eccentric madmen of the mid-'80s. Gruber was clever, classically educated, intelligent, highly sophisticated.
And driven by money, not ideology.
Precisely. Financial gain, not politics. He was the intellectual antithesis of the hero. The European white-collar mind challenging the blue-collar, pragmatic American cop.
Critics consistently cite Gruber as one of the most influential villains in the genre. He really raised the benchmark for what a charismatic, competent nemesis could be.
The conflict was no longer just brute strength against brute strength. It became wit against ingenuity, and that dramatically raised the stakes for action films permanently.
And the most iconic twist regarding Gruber, the famous sequence where he pretends to be an escaped hostage when he first meets McClane, that wasn't even in the original script.
That's correct, and it is a wonderful anecdote about creative collaboration on set. The screenwriter, Stephen E. D'Souza, happened to overhear Rickman affecting an American accent between takes.
Just for fun.
It's just for fun. And that simple observation sparked the idea for the famous disguise twist. They realized they could exploit Rickman's acting skill, so they had to rework the earlier scene of the executive Takagi's murder to conceal Gruber's identity from McClane.
So it was a late-stage addition.
A very late addition that dramatically improved the tension, established Gruber's duplicity, and humanized him just enough to make him truly terrifying. Let's move on to this thematic revolution. The studio failed to get their invincible hero, and that failure, ironically, forced them to embrace the everyman. Let's talk about how that vulnerability defined John McClane and permanently altered action cinema.
Well, the character of John McClane was a deliberate thematic choice. He was written to be vulnerable and fallible from the start. He's a New York cop trying to save his marriage, thrown into a hellish situation he neither prepared for nor wants to be in.
Right.
And Willis drew heavily on his own working-class upbringing to shape McClane's pragmatic attitude and that crucial gallows sense of humor. He's surviving, not dominating. He is the ultimate reluctant hero, defined by everything he lacks. A weapon, a plan, and, famously, a pair of shoes. He arrives with jet lag and marital baggage.
And what sets him apart from his contemporaries is the very real, very painful, physical, and emotional toll this whole experience takes on him.
Think about the physicality of it and the dialogue. McClane is far from the stoic, unfeeling heroes of the era. He openly sobs when he thinks he's failed. He admits his fear of death to Al Powell.
Which was genuinely unheard of in that genre at the time, for the hero to admit fear.
Absolutely. And he sustains actual lasting damage.
Which brings us to the notorious injury he suffered that became part of the film's authenticity. The permanent two-thirds hearing loss in his left ear.
That happened during filming, right?
It did. It happened when he fired those loud blank cartridges close to his head in the scene where he shoots a terrorist through a table. He was holding the weapon compressed into his upper chest, and the resulting noise caused that lasting damage.
It's an unfortunate real-world consequence, but it only amplifies that sense of painful authenticity the film was striving for. He doesn't just shake off a blow. He endures a lasting physical cost.
And the famous image of McClane, blood-stained, barefoot, crawling through the vents, that is the true emblem of the film. His wounds, particularly his feet being shredded by shattered glass, led critics to some powerful and surprisingly spiritual readings about his suffering.
You mean the idea of stigmata?
Exactly. The thematic depth here is fascinating. Several critics noted that McClane's bleeding, especially the wounds on his feet, resembled stigmata. This framed him not just as a cop, but as a working-class Christ-like figure, seeking redemption not just from the terrorists, but for his personal failings as a husband and a father.
So his physical sacrifice is a kind of penance.
It's framed as the painful means to save his family and reconcile his marriage. He is clumsy, relying entirely on improvisation, and he's only successful because he builds these genuine relationships with unexpected allies, not because he's inherently superhuman or superior to his enemies.
Which brings us to his famous line, "Yippee-ki-yay," followed by the expletive. It's often cited as the ultimate action movie catchphrase, yet its origin really emphasizes that reluctant, almost cowboy-like attitude.
It was actually inspired by old cowboy lingo, specifically from Roy Rogers, who used to say, "Yippee-ki-yay, kids." It was an attempt to ground him as a reluctant, all-American Western star archetype.
So it's not a line of triumph or superior confidence.
Not at all. It's a nervous throwaway taunt delivered during an impossible situation.
Moving on to the instrumental supporting relationships, these connections are vital because they enable McClane's survival and his transformation. First, there's Ollie Jenner McClane, played by Bonnie Bedelia.
And Holly is far from the traditional damsel in distress you'd typically see in 80s action films.
Not at all. She's presented as a high-powered, self-possessed executive who uses her maiden name, Gennaro, reflecting that professional division in their marriage. She is her own person, successful and confident, which is the very source of the conflict with the more traditional blue-collar McClane.
And that division is resolved so symbolically in the film's climax through a very specific object, her Rolex watch.
The gift from her employer.
A gift from her employer, Mr. Takagi, which represents her commitment to her high-powered career and the source of their marital separation. When McClane unclasps that watch at the very end to free Holly from Gruber's grasp, he is quite literally breaking the totem of their separation, signaling their reconciliation.
It's an incredibly neat piece of visual storytelling.
It really is.
But the truly novel intimacy in the film isn't romantic at all. It's the remote communication established between McClane and Sergeant Al Powell, played by Reginald Vell Johnson.
Powell serves as McClane's confessor, his ground-level anchor. Their distant communication, a New York cop trapped high up talking to an LAPD sergeant on the ground, allows McClane to confess his deep failings as a husband and a person in a way he just couldn't face-to-face with Holly.
So that non-romantic intimacy is crucial to McClane's growth. It ensures he emerges from the conflict as a potentially better man.
Exactly. And Powell himself has a profound arc related to his own personal trauma and redemption.
He's haunted by the past trauma of accidentally shooting a child while on duty.
Right, which has paralyzed him, psychologically preventing him from drawing his weapon again. He drives a desk because he can't function as a street officer anymore. His redemption is earned only when he is compelled to draw his gun and shoot Carl, Gruber's highly dangerous second-in-command, at the very end of the film.
It's a difficult moment. Some critics argue it relies on the cynical action trope that violence is the only true redemption.
And that's a fair critique, but within the film's logic, his personal paralysis is overcome through a necessary protective act. We have to have sympathy for his history and the difficult position he's placed in.
Beyond the thematic framework, the film is known for its legendary, visceral, and very practical stunts. Willis, despite his newfound star status, insisted on performing many of his own to enhance that sense of authentic danger.
We're talking about the famous 25-foot leap from the parking garage ledge with a fire hose wrapped around him, as a massive wall of flame exploded right behind him.
He's often said that was one of his toughest stunts.
It was. The force of the explosion was so immense, it actually pushed him toward the very edge of the airbag he was supposed to land on. It caused genuine concern among the crew that he might have been seriously injured. That palpable risk is what lends the film its raw energy.
And of course, the grand finale for the villain, Hans Gruber's fall from the 30th floor of Nakatomi Plaza. It's one of cinema's great moments, partially because it captures a completely genuine look of surprise and terror.
Director John McTiernan was determined to capture an authentic, unfaked reaction. Rickman was suspended on a raised platform and dropped a significant distance, reports vary, but it was a high, sudden drop onto a blue screen airbag.
And the key was the timing of the drop.
The key was that he was deliberately dropped earlier than the count of 3 he was given. McTiernan knew that there's no way he could fake that genuine look of shock and terror. And the result is that iconic 1.5-second sequence.
The logistics of filming that rapid descent were innovative for the time. They needed to keep him in sharp focus as he plummeted.
Exactly. The special effects teams had to engineer an automated system to control the camera's focus using a computer-controlled motor. A human operator just could not refocus the camera fast enough to keep Rickman in sharp focus during that rapid, brief descent.
All that technical complexity just to capture a genuine human moment of vulnerability.
Yes, the vulnerability of the villain in his final moment.
And the setting itself, Nakatomi Plaza, was meticulously designed with thematic intent, especially that 30th floor set.
The production designer, Jackson DeGovia, chose the under-construction Fox Plaza in Los Angeles as a primary location, since it was mostly unoccupied. The interior set for the 30th floor was notable because it recreated elements of Frank Lloyd Wright's famous house, Fallingwater. And this specific, highly modernist architectural choice was intended to reflect the contemporary trend of Japanese corporations buying up significant American corporate assets, grounding the action visually in 1980s American anxieties about foreign ownership and wealth.
And that structural choice, a Japanese-owned tower seized by German thieves, infiltrated by an American cop, that takes us right into the film's thematic core. Die Hard is so much more than an action movie. It's a detailed, even aggressive commentary on the anxieties and anti-establishment sentiments of 1980s America.
It absolutely operates within the context of the Reagan era. The film arrived at this critical juncture in the 1980s economy when U.S. blue-collar jobs were rapidly declining and Japanese technology and financial firms were significantly dominating the American market.
Symbolized by the iconic Japanese-owned tower.
Exactly. So when Nakatomi Plaza is seized by a group of sophisticated, well-dressed, and primarily German villains who are revealed to be thieves, not political terrorists, critics immediately viewed this as reflecting a deep-seated U.S. anxiety over foreign financial power and intellectual superiority.
And the dynamic between McClane and Gruber supports this reading perfectly. McClane is the all-American stereotype, often compared to classic Western stars like John Wayne.
And he prevails not through technology or superior training, but through improvisation, grit, and wit. He wins against the European, classically educated Gruber, who treats the entire operation like a chess game. This narrative suggests the triumph of pragmatic American ingenuity over foreign financial sophistication.
And critics have argued that the film embodied a broader blue-collar rage against the structures of the time.
A rage directed against what was perceived as the out-of-touch American elite establishment. Feminists, yuppies, the sensationalist media, incompetent authorities, and foreign nationals.
McClane, the cop who chews gum and gets dirty, is the everyman fighting against villains who are essentially dressed like elite corporate workers.
which blurs the line between corporate villainy and outright organized crime. His methods are simple, using tape, vents, and ropes against Gruber's sophisticated computers and C4 explosives.
This inherent distrust of the establishment leads directly into the film's powerful and very explicit anti-government, anti-bureaucracy, and anti-corporation stance. The entire operational structure of law enforcement in the film is designed to fail.
The film's structure consistently humiliates the official authorities.
Yeah.
The police and FBI agents are not just ineffective, they present a bigger, more dangerous obstacle than the actual criminals.
Right. They repeatedly demonstrate this bureaucratic incompetence, failing to recognize that the terrorists have anticipated their every predictable move.
The two FBI agents, Johnson and Johnson, an ironic pairing, one of whom is explicitly named after John Wayne, are the perfect example of this. They arrive with overwhelming force and absolutely zero situational awareness.
And their biggest mistake is critical to the plot.
It is. The FBI's standard operating procedure demands they shut down the power grid to the city block, which is exactly what Gruber predicted and needed to unlock the final vault locks.
He says it out loud. When they get here, they'll shut down the power.
And the FBI blindly follows protocol, enabling the crime. This sequence is a scathing critique of government institutions prioritizing rules over reality, playing right into the hands of the intellectual criminal.
So McClane has to operate entirely outside of these bureaucratically approved procedures, which is ultimately why he survives.
When a terrorist tries to assert that McClane can't harm him because there are rules for policemen, McClane's dismissive response, that the assertion of police rules is, "so my captain keeps telling me," tells us exactly where he stands.
And the authorities are consistently punished for standing in his way. Right down to the sleazy, intrusive TV reporter, Richard Thornburg, who is physically assaulted by Holly in a moment that gets immediate audience applause.
The corporate world is equally satirized, particularly through the character of Executive Harry Ellis.
Ellis is famously portrayed as this sleazy, cocaine-fueled executive, completely representative of the excess and self-interest of 1980s yuppie culture. He is the polar opposite of the self-sacrificing McClane.
He tries to negotiate with the terrorists and sell out McClane for personal gain, revealing the moral bankruptcy of the corporate elite. Gruber, the intellectual thief, points out the ironic truth that the difference between corporate employees like Ellis and the terrorists is only that one uses a pen and the other uses a gun.
A profound thematic parallel.
It suggests corporate game is inherently criminal.
Finally, we have to look at the sophisticated musical subversion that underpins all these themes, particularly the choice of using classical music to highlight the villains.
Composer Michael Kamen was initially hired after director McTiernan insisted on including cues from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, specifically the Ode to Joy. This was a highly deliberate choice.
And McTiernan was inspired by Stanley Kubrick.
Exactly. Inspired by how Kubrick had famously used that music to highlight ultraviolence in Clockwork Orange.
And this classical music choice, used by Kamen to underscore Gruber's movements, it subtly elevates his character. It reinforces his identity as the intellectual, the cultured European playing a high-stakes game.
And Kamen's arrangement is masterful. He initially objected to tarnishing the piece in an action film, but he relented after understanding the intent. He used the Ode to Joy motif, but played it in slightly lower, more menacing keys, and used instrumentation that sounded far less triumphant and more cold, more mechanical.
It becomes Gruber's theme.
It becomes his motif, playing most prominently when the villains are succeeding in their meticulous plan to steal the bearer bonds. It is intellectual menace scored to perfection.
And Kamen didn't stop there with the musical subversion of the Christmas setting.
No, he brilliantly mixed in traditional Christmas classics like Winter Wonderland and Let It Snow with sleigh bells during moments of high menace and violence. It's a cynical appropriation of Christmas iconography.
Underscoring two ideas.
First, that the corporation was hosting a party on Christmas Eve, keeping employees away from their families, highlighting the greed of the era. And second, that the villains were attacking traditional societal and family values. By defeating them, McClane, the family man, symbolically upholds tradition and defends society.
And as a final cultural note on the music, the film really helped popularize Run DMC's Christmas in Hollis. While it was popular before, its inclusion in Die Hard cemented its status as a foundational modern Christmas classic. As we transition into the legacy of Die Hard, we see a film born from controversy that rapidly became the genre-defining blueprint for modern action cinema. It redefined the industry's entire vocabulary.
It revitalized and redefined the action genre, primarily by shifting the focus away from the muscle-bound, invincible hero to the relatable, vulnerable protagonist who succeeded through improvisation, wit, and sheer physical endurance, not superior firepower.
And the film's most significant cultural contribution is arguably the phrase that instantly defines an entire subgenre of action cinema: Die Hard on a Mel or Die Hard on a...
It became instant shorthand for any action film set in a restricted, confined environment where a lone, everyman hero has to overcome overwhelming odds against a group of organized, intelligent criminals. The concept was immediately co-opted all across Hollywood.
The examples are endless, and they just reinforced the film's powerful structural influence. Speed became Die Hard on a bus.
Under Siege was Die Hard on a battleship.
Passenger 57 was Die Hard on a plane.
Sudden Death was Die Hard in a hockey arena.
The formula was so successful because it automatically implies the stakes, the location, and the type of vulnerable hero involved.
Willis himself recalled being pitched a film early in his career that was actually described to him as Die Hard in a skyscraper. The irony was certainly not lost on him. It confirms how instantly the original defined and owned that trope.
And critics noted that it wasn't until the mid-90s, with the rise of CGI and films like The Rock, that the genre really started to move beyond the practical constraints of that Die Hard blueprint.
Its initial mixed reception gave way to a powerful critical reassessment. It's now widely considered one of the greatest action films ever made. A quintessential American action film that perfectly captured the zeitgeist of the late 20th century.
And that formal recognition is key to understanding its place in history. In 2017, the United States Library of Congress selected Die Hard for preservation in the National Film Registry.
For being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That puts it on par with cinematic masterpieces.
Furthermore, the American Film Institute recognized the characters themselves, ranking both John McClane and Hans Gruber on its list of 100 heroes and villains. The film elevated Willis from a popular TV star to a leading man, and it made Rickman a global celebrity in his early 40s.
And Willis further solidified the film's cultural status in 2007 by donating the iconic blood and sweat-stained undershirt worn in the film to the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian Institution.
That shirt.
That shirt, more than any explosion, is the lasting emblem of McClane's difference, a monument to vulnerability, not invincibility.
We can't talk about the legacy without addressing the perpetual cultural argument that resurfaces every single holiday season. Is it a Christmas film or just an action film set at Christmas?
The arguments for its Christmas status are compelling and they're thematic. The setting is Christmas Eve. The plot revolves around a holiday party. The score uses Christmas melodies mixed with menace.
And the screenwriter, Stephen E. D'Souza, explicitly supports its Christmas status. He suggested the film was deliberately crafted to be enjoyed every year during the holiday season.
Right. But conversely, Bruce Willis himself has stated publicly that it is definitively not a Christmas film. He treats the setting as merely incidental to the plot mechanics.
So the debate rages on.
Although the distributor, 20th Century Fox, commercially settled the debate for marketing purposes back in 2018. They released a trailer that labeled it, quite grandly, the greatest Christmas story ever told. From a corporate perspective, the debate ended right there.
It successfully cornered the action market and the holiday market
Simultaneously.
Finally, we turn to the sequel effect. The film's monumental success, of course, kicked off 4 sequels, though critics agree the original remains the most acclaimed and thematically rich.
The sequels offer a fascinating look at the action genre's inevitable gravitational pull back toward the invincible hero. The original was praised for consciously rejecting that muscle-bound 80s archetype.
But as the franchise progressed...
As it progressed, McClane increasingly evolved back towards that very archetype. By the later films, he had become a superhuman capable of surviving impossible damage, explosions, and plane crashes. Exactly the invincible killing machine that the first Die Hard has so consciously rebelled against and redefined.
So that shift in character proves just how fragile the original film's core thematic commitment really was. The success of the original was based on genuine physical vulnerability.
But the commercial demands of building a franchise pushed the character back into the bulletproof, superhuman mold it tried so hard to escape. The critical consensus remains the original is a landmark achievement, while the subsequent entries often diluted that powerful initial legacy.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The enduring value of the original Die Hard lies not in its spectacle, but in its ability to connect massive action set pieces with a deeply personal, relatable narrative. a flawed protagonist fighting less for world peace and more for the survival of his marriage, all set against a backdrop of complex 1980s social anxieties.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises an important question for you to consider. When you strip away the explosions, the sophisticated plans, and the gunfights, how much did the film's success really depend not on the ultimate detonation of the Nakatomi Plaza rooftop, but on the profound, painful vulnerability conveyed by that single iconic, blood-stained undershirt?
That strategic and necessary shift in focus from muscle to vulnerability is why we are still talking about this film today.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Thanks for listening.